The night was cold and the wind carried whispers through the empty fields. The sky hung low, dark with clouds, and the earth seemed to hold its breath. In a small cabin at the edge of town, a woman cried out, not from joy, but from pain. She had brought life into the world again, not once, but 3 times before. This time it was another daughter. No son, no heir, no pride for the man she called her husband. Instead of kindness, she was met with rage. His voice rose like thunder, his hand struck like a whip, and the walls echoed with the sound of cruelty. For him, daughters were a curse, a burden he could not carry, a shame he would not bear. He blamed her as if she alone had chosen their fate. He did not see the miracle in tiny fingers or the beauty in soft cries. He saw only disappointment. The town had heard stories before. Whispers of the man's temper, the bruises hidden beneath her sleeves, the long silences that followed screams in the night. But no one spoke openly. No one dared. In this place, the strong ruled and the weak were left to endure. Tradition weighed heavy, and those who suffered were expected to suffer quietly. On this night, her suffering reached its edge. Beaten, broken, and cast aside, she lay in the dirt outside her home. The cold bit into her skin, the ground pressed hard against her bones, and her breath came in shallow gasps. Her husband had made his judgment, and the world had turned away. She had no hope left, only the sound of her daughters crying inside, muffled by the walls she could not reach. Far away, across the plains, another figure moved through the darkness. A man who knew silence better than most, whose only companions were the cattle in his fields and the echo of his own footsteps. They called him the rancher, a man of few words, one who carried loneliness like a second skin. Yet behind his stern face lived something steady, something unbroken. He was not known for kindness, not spoken of as gentle, but he carried a code, one that stirred when others looked away. That night his path would cross hers, and with a single sentence, everything she knew would change. The morning sun had not yet risen when the woman stirred where she lay in the dirt. Her body ached with every breath, bruises painted across her arms and face. The cold earth had stolen what little strength she had left. She tried to move, but the weight of pain pressed her down. Somewhere inside the cabin, her daughters whimpered, their cries faint through the thick wooden walls. She stretched her hand toward the door, but her fingers grasped nothing but air. Her husband had locked her out, leaving her like a shadow discarded at dawn. Her mind drifted through the memories of the night before. The shouting, the blows, the bitter words he hurled at her as though she were less than human. He called her a curse, said she had failed him again and again. 3 daughters and now another, what use was she? His rage came not only from anger but from shame. The town would laugh, he said. They would whisper about him, a man unable to father a son. And so he punished her, as if her womb alone had betrayed him. The woman's eyes stung, not only from tears but from the dust carried by the morning breeze. She pressed her palms into the ground, struggling to rise. The thought of her daughters kept her moving, each step small, each breath sharp. She longed to hold them, to shield them, but the door between them remained closed, as though it had turned to stone. She slumped against the wall, her body weak, her spirit fighting against despair. Far across the plain, the lonely rancher rode his horse along the edge of town. He had no reason to be there, no ties that bound him, yet he found himself drawn by the sound of silence that felt too heavy. He was a man used to quiet, to empty days and nights. But this silence was different, it carried the weight of sorrow. He slowed his horse, his eyes scanning the path ahead. It was then he saw her. A woman crumpled in the dirt, her face swollen, her body bent in pain. At first he thought she might be gone, another lost soul in a harsh land. But then he saw her chest rise faintly, the shallow rhythm of life refusing to surrender. He dismounted, his boots pressing into the earth as he approached. She looked up, startled by the shadow that fell across her. Her eyes widened in fear, expecting another blow, another cruel hand. But instead she saw a man standing still, his gaze steady, his face carved with concern he did not put into words. His hands remained at his sides, open, not threatening. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another, the broken woman and the silent rancher. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped. He knelt, reaching into his coat, pulling out a flask of water. He held it out, not forcing, only offering. She hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. The cool liquid touched her lips and her throat eased for the first time in hours. The rancher's eyes shifted to the cabin. He saw the door barred shut, the faint sound of children inside. His jaw tightened. He had heard enough stories in town to piece together the truth. This was not the first time she had been beaten. It was not the first time her cries had gone unanswered. But this time, she had been thrown away, discarded like waste. He looked back at her. She tried to speak again, her words weak, broken. "My girls," she whispered, pointing faintly toward the cabin. Her voice cracked and tears filled her eyes. The rancher followed her hand, his face hardening. He rose to his full height, shoulders squared, and knocked on the cabin door with a force that rattled the wood. There was no answer at first, only silence. Then heavy footsteps approached. The door creaked open and her husband appeared, his face red with anger, his eyes narrowed at the sight of the rancher. "What do you want?" he spat. The rancher said nothing at first, his gaze steady and unflinching. Then his voice came, low and firm, carrying the weight of a man who had no need to shout to be heard. "You're done," the husband sneered. "This is my house, my wife, my problem." His words dripped with venom, his hands clenching at his sides. The rancher did not move, did not blink. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow falling across the doorway. "Not anymore," he said. "She's coming with me." The woman gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Her husband's face twisted with rage, but he saw something in the rancher's eyes that gave him pause. A quiet fire, a strength that came not from boasting but from certainty. The rancher did not flinch, did not back down. The silence between them grew thick, heavy as steel. Finally, the husband spat at the ground, cursing under his breath. He turned and slammed the door, the sound echoing into the morning air. The rancher did not look back. He reached down, offering his hand to the woman. She stared at it, hesitant, unsure if she could trust another man's hand. But something in his eyes told her this was different. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. His grip was strong, steady, not harsh. He pulled her gently to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. She looked into his face once more, seeing no pity, no judgment, only resolve. And then she heard the words, quiet but firm, that would mark the turning point of her life. "You're coming with me." The woman's legs trembled beneath her, weak from the beating and from a night spent on the cold ground. For a moment she thought she might fall again, but the rancher's hand held her steady. His grip was firm, not possessive, not cruel, just steady, like a man used to leading a horse through a storm. She leaned on him without meaning to, her body craving the strength she no longer had. He led her toward his horse, the tall animal shifting its weight as if sensing the change about to unfold. The woman's heart pounded. She had not ridden in years, and her body felt too broken to climb. But the rancher did not rush her. He placed one hand on the saddle, the other beneath her arm, and with a quiet lift she was seated. Her breath caught in her throat as the world tilted, but the leather beneath her steadied her. She clung to the saddle horn, her eyes darting back toward the cabin where her daughters still cried. The rancher followed her gaze. He turned without a word and strode back to the door, his boots striking the earth like a drum. With one powerful shove, he pushed it open. The husband's angry shouts rose inside, but they were drowned out by the cries of the little girls. One after another, the rancher lifted them into his arms, 3 small, frightened faces, each pressed against his chest for a brief moment before he carried them outside. He placed them carefully in front of their mother on the horse, her arms wrapping protectively around them as tears spilled freely down her face. Her husband's voice carried from the doorway, sharp and furious, but the rancher did not answer. He mounted his horse with a fluid motion, guiding the reins with one hand. The woman felt the strength in his back as he leaned forward slightly, urging the horse on. The animal surged into motion, hooves pounding against the earth as the cabin fell away behind them. The shouts of the husband grew smaller and smaller until they were swallowed by the wind. The ride was long, the fields stretching endlessly before them, the rising sun casting gold across the horizon. The woman held her daughters tightly, their small bodies pressed against hers, their sobs quieting as the steady rhythm of the horse lulled them. The rancher rode in silence, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He did not speak, yet his presence filled the space with something stronger than words. The woman's mind raced. She had left everything behind, not by choice, but by force. The cabin, the man she had once called husband, the life she had endured. Now she was carried toward something unknown. Fear mingled with relief, her thoughts twisting between hope and doubt. Could she trust this stranger? Would he cast her aside as easily as the man before? Or was this the first step toward something she could not yet imagine? As the morning wore on, they crossed the open plains where the wind swept through tall grass. The rancher slowed his horse near a stream, dismounting with ease. He offered his hand to help her down, and though she hesitated, her body obeyed. She slid from the saddle, her daughters clinging to her dress. He filled his canteen with water, handing it first to the children. Their small lips pressed against the cool metal, drinking greedily. Then he handed it to her. She drank slowly, each sip easing the dryness in her throat. The rancher did not ask questions, did not press her for answers. He watched quietly, his face unreadable, but his actions spoke louder than words. He tore strips from a cloth in his saddlebag, dipping them in the water before handing them to her to press against her bruises. She obeyed, wincing at the sting but grateful for the relief. For the first time in days, she felt human again, not just a vessel for anger and blame. When the horse was rested and the children calmer, he lifted them back into place. His movements were steady, almost practiced, as if he had carried burdens heavier than this before. They rode again, the sun climbing higher, the land stretching wide around them. She noticed how he sat tall in the saddle, how the reins rested easily in his hands, how he seemed part of the land itself, rooted, unshaken, steady as the mountains in the distance. Hours passed, and the outline of a ranch came into view. Fences stretched across fields dotted with cattle, and a small house stood near a cluster of trees. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, promising warmth. The woman's chest tightened. She had no claim to this place, no right to step into another man's world. Yet the rancher guided his horse forward as if there was no question at all. When they reached the yard, he dismounted and helped her down once more. The children clung to her legs, their eyes wide as they looked at the house. She stood frozen, unsure whether to step forward or turn away. But the rancher opened the door and nodded for her to follow. His expression was firm, yet calm, leaving no room for doubt. Inside, the house was simple but strong. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with tools and supplies. It was not grand, not soft, but it was steady, built for survival, not for show. He set down his gear, then motioned to the table where bread and dried meat rested. The woman led her daughters forward, their small hands clutching hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she sat at a table without fear. The rancher lit a fire, its warmth filling the room. He glanced at her bruises, at the children's thin faces, then turned away, giving them space to eat. He did not hover, did not crowd them. He moved with quiet purpose, as if he understood that what they needed most was not words, but safety. The woman watched him from across the room, her heart heavy yet strangely lighter than before. She did not know this man, not truly. She did not know his story, his pain, or why he had chosen to help her. But she knew one thing. When the world turned away, when her own blood cast her out, he had spoken 4 words that gave her life again. "You're coming with me." The days that followed were strange for the woman. She had never known a place where silence felt safe. In her husband's cabin, silence was always heavy with threat, broken only by the sound of anger or the crack of a fist. Here, on the ranch, the silence was different. It was steady, like the quiet of the fields at dawn or the low hum of cattle in the distance. She found herself listening to it, letting it wrap around her like a blanket she never thought she'd have. The rancher kept to his work. At first light, he was already in the fields, checking the fences, guiding the cattle, moving with the rhythm of a man who had done the same thing every day for years. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were plain and careful, like tools chosen for a purpose. He never raised his voice, not even when the girls made noise or scattered hay across the floor. He simply bent down, showed them how to gather it again, and returned to his tasks without complaint. The woman watched him closely, searching for cracks in his calm. She expected anger, impatience, the sudden shift that had always come before. But instead, she saw consistency. The rancher treated the children as if their presence was as natural as the wind outside. He never questioned their worth, never looked at them with the disdain she had come to expect from a man. When one of the girls spilled water on the floor, he simply fetched another bucket and showed her how to carry it properly. When another cried in the night, he stoked the fire, letting its warmth fill the room until she drifted back to sleep. Still, the woman felt unease pressing at her chest. She was not used to kindness. Her body healed slowly, but her heart resisted. Each time the rancher glanced her way, she wondered what he wanted in return. No man did something for nothing, she told herself. Her husband had reminded her of that 1,000 times, yet the rancher asked for nothing. He gave her space, allowed her to rest, let her care for her children. And that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. The town, meanwhile, did not stay silent. Word spread quickly that the lonely rancher had brought a beaten woman and her daughters to his home. Whispers filled the saloon, traveled down the main street, and circled at the well. Some said he had lost his mind, taking in a burden that wasn't his. Others claimed he had always been strange, a man too long alone, and this was proof of it. A few even suggested darker things, muttering that no man could want a woman with 3 daughters unless he planned something foul. The rancher ignored it all. He came to town for supplies as he always had, his tall frame moving with quiet certainty. When the whispers grew louder, he met them with silence, his eyes steady, his back unbending. The woman stayed at the ranch, clutching her daughters close, afraid of the look she might face if she dared step into town. She remembered too well how the people had turned away when her husband's cruelty left marks on her skin. They would not protect her now either. But the ranch was different. The land did not judge. The wind carried no rumors. The cattle needed feeding whether the world whispered or not. She began to find small pieces of herself again in that space. She learned the rhythm of the rancher's work, helping where she could, her daughters trailing after her like shadows. She gathered eggs from the hens, swept the floors, and cooked simple meals with what little they had. Each task felt like a stone laid in a new foundation, fragile but real. At night, when the girls were asleep, she sometimes sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the flames. The rancher sat across from her, sharpening a knife or mending a rope, his presence steady but not pressing. They rarely spoke, but the silence between them felt alive, filled with unspoken truths. She caught herself wanting to ask him why he had taken her in, why he had spoken those words. But the fear of the answer held her back. The rancher, for his part, did not ask about her past. He did not mention her husband, did not pry into the wounds she carried. He simply moved forward, one day at a time, as if the past was less important than the work of surviving the present. His restraint confused her, but it also eased her. He allowed her to exist without explanation, and that was something she had never known. Yet doubts still lingered. Sometimes, when the night was deep and her daughters slept soundly beside her, she wondered if she had traded one kind of prison for another. She wondered if one day the rancher's silence would turn to rage, if his steady hands would strike instead of help. She wondered if she would ever be more than a woman beaten for the daughters she bore. And then there were moments, fleeting but powerful, that cut through her doubt. When one of her girls laughed freely for the first time in months, chasing a butterfly in the yard, she saw the rancher pause in his work, a faint smile flickering across his stern face. When her youngest fell asleep on his shoulder as he carried her from the barn, The sight pierced her heart in ways she could not name. The world outside still whispered, but inside the ranch, something different was taking root. Something small, fragile, and uncertain. She could not yet name it, could not yet trust it. But it was there, in the way her daughters no longer cried themselves to sleep, in the way her bruises faded without new ones taking their place, in the way the rancher's steady presence filled the air without suffocating her. The past clung to her like a shadow, but for the first time the darkness did not feel endless. The change came slowly, almost hidden within the rhythm of the days. The woman no longer woke with fear in her chest. At first, it startled her to open her eyes and hear nothing but the soft crackle of the fire or the distant call of a rooster. No shouting, no footsteps pacing, no threats waiting in the air. The quiet itself became something new, a reminder that she was not trapped anymore. Her daughters stirred beside her, their little bodies curled close, breathing softly without whimpers or restless cries. For the first time in a long while, their sleep was unbroken. The rancher kept to his work, but his presence filled the ranch in more ways than she expected. He showed the girls how to scatter grain for the chickens, how to gather eggs without cracking them, how to brush the horse's mane. They followed him like small shadows, their laughter ringing out across the yard. At first, they looked back at their mother each time, as though unsure if they were allowed. She nodded, and slowly their hesitation turned into freedom. Their giggles startled her at times, so unused to hearing joy in their voices. It felt fragile, like something that could break if the wind blew too hard. Yet it grew stronger with each passing day. The woman tried to help where she could. She cleaned the cabin, cooked simple meals, mended clothes with trembling hands that grew steadier with practice. Her bruises began to fade, though the ache in her ribs reminded her of the past each time she bent too far. The rancher never stopped her from working, but neither did he demand it. If she stumbled, he wordlessly took the task into his own hands until she caught her breath again. He seemed to understand without needing to ask, and that quiet understanding unsettled her in ways she could not explain. The town, however, refused to stay silent. Rumors traveled faster than the wind. When the rancher came for supplies, men leaned against doorframes, muttering. Some laughed at him, saying he had tied himself to a burden he would regret. Others whispered crueler things about the woman and why she had been cast out. He listened to none of it. His steps stayed firm, his gaze steady, his words few. When one man pushed too far with a sneer about the children, the rancher's stare alone was enough to silence him. He did not raise his fists, but his silence carried a weight sharper than steel. Back at the ranch, the woman noticed the burden he carried on his shoulders. He bore the whispers for her sake, though he never spoke of them. She wondered why he did it, why a man who had lived alone so long would tie himself to her pain. Late at night, when the fire burned low and he sat sharpening a blade or mending leather, she wanted to ask. The words pressed against her lips, but fear always pulled them back. What if the answer shattered the fragile safety she had found? One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, she sat across from him by the fire. The flames painted shadows across the wooden walls, and the room smelled of smoke and pine. She finally found her voice, though it trembled. "Why?" she asked softly, her eyes fixed on the fire instead of him. The rancher paused, the knife in his hand stilling. He looked at her, his face unreadable for a long moment. Then he set the blade down and leaned back in his chair. His voice came low and steady. "Because I couldn't walk away." Her breath caught. The simplicity of his words left her shaken. There was no grand speech, no hidden motive, just truth. He had seen her suffering, and he had chosen not to leave her in it. She felt her chest tighten, as though something long buried was trying to rise again. Gratitude, perhaps, or trust, but she could not yet name it. As days turned to weeks, the children began to change too. Their hollow cheeks filled, their eyes brightened. They learned to laugh without fear of punishment. Sometimes, the youngest would run to the rancher, tugging at his sleeve until he lifted her onto his shoulder. The sight made the woman's heart ache with something she had forgotten: hope. She caught herself smiling when she hadn't meant to, her lips remembering an expression they had nearly forgotten. But shadows still lingered. Some nights she woke with the memory of fists and curses in her ears. She would sit up quickly, heart pounding, only to find the cabin quiet, the children safe beside her. In those moments, the rancher never asked what haunted her. He simply stirred the fire, the glow chasing away the dark, his presence a steady anchor. She hated that he saw her fear, but at the same time, she clung to the safety it brought. The land around them thrived in the late season. Fields of grass waved in the wind, cattle moved slowly across the range, and the air carried the scent of rain. The rancher showed her how to milk a cow, his large hands steady as he guided hers. She stumbled, spilling more than she caught, and for the first time she heard the sound of his laugh, quiet, rough, but real. It startled her, pulling a laugh from her own lips before she could stop it. For a moment the weight of the past lifted, replaced by something lighter, something she had thought she'd never feel again. Still, she knew danger lingered. Her husband had not forgotten her. Men like him never let go of their pride so easily. Each time she thought of him, her stomach twisted. She wondered if he would come for her, if he would try to drag her back into the life she had barely escaped. The thought made her cling tighter to her daughters, made her watch the horizon with wary eyes. The rancher seemed to know this too. He kept a rifle by the door, his gaze often drifting toward the distance as if expecting trouble. He did not speak of it, but his readiness told her he would not let harm come without a fight. The knowledge eased her fear, even as it stirred new questions in her heart. The woman did not know what the future held. But each day, as she watched her daughters laugh and breathe freely, she felt a spark of strength return to her. And though the past whispered like a shadow at her back, she could not deny the truth standing before her. Here, in this place, life had begun again. The sky darkened earlier than usual, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. The wind carried the scent of rain, sharp and restless, pressing against the wooden walls of the cabin. The woman felt it in her bones, that unease that crept in when change was near. She moved about the room, tucking her daughters into their beds, brushing hair from their faces, whispering soft words to soothe them. Their eyes closed slowly, one by one, until the sound of their breathing filled the small room with peace. The rancher sat by the door, his rifle propped within reach. His gaze was fixed on the horizon through the small window, where the last strip of daylight was fading. He had been quieter than usual all day, though his silence carried weight rather than distance. She had noticed how often he stepped outside, how long he stood watching the open land. He hadn't said a word, but she understood. He was waiting for something or someone. She tried to ignore the knot in her stomach, but it tightened with every creak of the wind against the house. She remembered her husband's face, twisted with rage, his voice cursing her name, calling her worthless. Men like him didn't forgive, didn't let go. He had been humiliated when she left, even more so when the town began to whisper. His pride was a weapon, and she knew it wouldn't stay buried. The hours passed slowly. The fire crackled, casting shifting shadows along the log walls. The rancher finally stood, moving to add another log to the flames. The light flared, warming the room, but the unease only deepened. She sat near the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting toward the door as though expecting it to burst open at any moment. Then it came, the distant sound of hooves pounding against the earth. Her breath caught, her body freezing. The rancher moved to the window, his face hardening as he looked out into the night. Lantern light flickered in the distance, growing closer, joined by the shadowy outlines of riders. The woman's heart sank. She knew before he said a word. "They're coming," the rancher said quietly, his hand tightening around the rifle. Her body trembled. She reached for her daughters, pressing her hand against the door of their small room as if her touch alone could shield them from what was about to happen. The rancher's eyes flicked to her, steady, unshaken. "Stay with them," he said firmly. The pounding of hooves grew louder until the yard was filled with men. Voices shouted, angry and sharp, demanding she be handed over. Her husband's voice rose above the rest, thick with fury. "She's mine. Bring her out or we'll take her by force." The rancher opened the door and stepped outside, the rifle resting against his arm. The firelight from the cabin spilled onto the porch, outlining his tall frame against the darkness. The men shifted uneasily at the sight of him, though they outnumbered him. His silence carried weight, his stillness a warning. "You've got no claim here," the rancher said, his voice calm but firm. Her husband spat into the dirt, his face twisted with rage. "She's my wife. Those girls are mine. You think you can steal from me?" The rancher's eyes narrowed. "You beat her, you cast her out. You left her to die, that's no claim, that's a crime." Murmurs ran through the crowd, but her husband's pride flared hotter than their whispers. He dismounted, storming forward, his fists clenched. "Step aside or I'll—" The click of the rifle cut his words short. The rancher didn't raise his voice, didn't even raise the weapon. He simply held it steady, his gaze locked on the man before him. "You'll do nothing," he said. The yard grew still. The horses snorted, shifting their hooves, the men behind her husband glancing nervously at one another. The firelight from their lanterns flickered across their faces, showing doubt where rage had once been. No one wanted to test the rancher's resolve. Inside the cabin, the woman held her daughters close, her heart racing. She wanted to look away, to hide from the confrontation, but her feet carried her to the doorway. She saw the two men facing each other, the one who had broken her spirit and the one who had given her a chance to breathe again. Her husband's face darkened when he saw her standing in the doorway. "You think you're safe," he shouted. "You belong to me. You'll always belong to me." The words cut into her, sharp and cruel, but this time they did not sink as deep. She felt her daughter's small hands clutching at her dress, felt the warmth of the fire at her back, felt the steady presence of the rancher standing before her. For the first time she did not cower. The rancher spoke again, his voice like stone. "She belongs to no one, not you, not me. She is free, and if you try to take her, you'll answer to me." The silence that followed was heavy. The husband's chest heaved, his rage burning, but he saw no weakness in the man before him. The rifle stayed steady, the eyes unflinching. Slowly his bravado faltered. He spat again, cursing under his breath, then turned back to his horse. His men followed, their torches swaying as they rode into the darkness. The yard grew quiet again, save for the wind and the crackle of the fire inside the cabin. The rancher lowered the rifle, his shoulders relaxing only slightly. He turned back toward the house, his eyes meeting hers. She felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest, heavy but different from the fear she had carried for so long. Her daughters clung tighter, their eyes wide, their voices whispering questions she could not yet answer. She pulled them close, holding them with all the strength she had left. The rancher stepped back inside, setting the rifle near the door, his movements calm, unhurried, as though what had just passed was nothing more than another storm weathered on the plains. The fire still burned in the hearth, its glow spilling across the wooden floor. The woman sank onto the bench, her daughters gathered around her, her breath coming in unsteady waves. The rancher sat across from her, his face steady, his presence filling the room like a wall against the darkness outside. The night stretched long, the shadows deep, but for the first time the woman felt something new beneath the fear that still lingered. It was small, fragile, but steady. A flicker of strength, a spark of freedom, a whisper that perhaps the past no longer owned her.